Washington has added a fair amount of talent on the defensive line, but they still need more.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thanks for making this your first watch or first listen of the days. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. And just a quick reminder to all you everydayers out there, wherever you're getting this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, wherever that might be, please make sure to click that subscribe button, click that little bell as well, so you never miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you're audio only, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help the show out a lot. Now, I got a really fun show coming at all you everydayers out there. I want to spend some time talking about Washington basketball's big win over Ohio State, but it's transfer portal season. We got to get there. Jayden Limar announced his commitment from transferring from Oregon, I should say. I don't think that he's the only guy that Washington should be looking at from Oregon, so we'll talk about him. I'll talk about some other guys in a little bit, but we need to talk about the defensive line because it is by far Washington's biggest need still. And yes, they've done a really good job adding some really solid prospects, whether it be Deshaun Watts, Darren Conley, you got Kyle McClendon in there now. And as of Monday, when I'm recording this, Logan George, So you got a really nice solid base there, but you've lost so many guys, whether it be to the transfer portal, like Bryce Butler, the Parker twins, Caleb Smith, Dominic Macon, or to graduation, where you've lost 4 or 5 solid contributing bodies, especially along the interior. So I look at this and I think Washington needs so much more. And one guy who really comes to mind to me, and Washington does really need to go big with one of these last editions. I feel like we're going to see 2, maybe even possibly 3 more, depending on who enters the transfer portal, with still a few days remaining for guys to do that at the position. And the first player that popped into my head that's still out there and available, and yeah, he's one of the top rated guys on 247's board that's still available. That's Enow Etta from Michigan. This is a guy who originally committed to Michigan out of high school because who's a really highly recruited guy out of Texas, because he wanted to play edge rusher. And Michigan was one of, as he said, I believe it was 3 schools that were going to let him play on the edge. And then after some turnover following his first season there, they wanted to bulk him up and they wanted to play him on the interior. And he said he eventually just gutted up and did it because he just kind of accepted that was going to be his more natural position in the long run. Now, the reason I want to reference that is because he was solidly productive over this past season. 15 tackles, 2.5 for loss, half a sack. He is a really nice athlete. And again, having that versatility, that flexibility to play inside and outside is so important. And that is something that I believe Washington is looking for from one of these last couple of guys that they're trying to go out and add to round out this portal cycle. And if you're able to grab an athlete of Enow Etta's caliber, I think that's exactly what you're looking for. And you can tell him, hey, look, we do still want you to play on the interior, but look at how we utilized a guy like Deshaun Lynch through his time here, where he did get some snaps on the interior, but he also was very, very helpful for us at outside linebacker. And we feel like you can do something in a similar vein. I think that is a really great way to sell a very talented player who has 2 years of eligibility remaining. And obviously, like I was saying, had 30-something offers coming out of Texas. So he was a very highly recruited player that you're looking for in terms of somebody who you believe has that high ceiling and can come in and make an impact alongside all these other guys. Because again, I feel like you're doing a really nice job if you're Washington in adding talent to the room, but you're still looking to add more and as much disruptive, high ceiling athletic talent as you possibly can. And a guy like Enow Etta fits that mold perfectly. Another guy who I'd be really interested in that same light, as Washington has really seemingly taken this role of looking at guys who have multiple years of eligibility remaining. And I'm sure that, they've had to shift their strategy a little bit now where Alinius Davis is really the only guy with any experience coming back in 2026 that is, again, not necessarily become the highest priority anymore of just 1-year mercenaries while you just go and try to win all these battles in the high school ranks and then see what goes on from there, is a guy like Kevin Wynn. down at Florida State. Another former highly recruited guy, 6'3", 335 pounds, was very, very limited this season, was expected to be a big part of their defensive line in 2026, but with what Florida State has been over the last couple of years, it feels like that program is just really taking a turn for the worse over the last 24 months or so. And again, really limited this year, was able to preserve his red shirt, 1 tackle, 1 pass breakup, not necessarily too much to write home about in the department of production, but again, high ceiling, really nice athlete on the interior, gives you that size that you're looking for to potentially play nose tackle, especially now with Javon Parker transferring out, and one of those guys who, alongside a Kai McClendon, and whether it be a Deshaun Watts, a Darren Conley, whoever else, can give you a little bit more from a pass rush perspective than what we've seen Washington's defensive tackles give over the last few years. And this is one of those things where it's not going to be easy to win some of these battles, with Enow Etta being at Michigan from Texas, Kevin Wynn being one of these Florida guys as well. But this is something that Washington needs to go out and continue to try to sell in any way possible as you try to just establish yourself in the Big Ten and gain a foothold in terms of recruiting nationally. We've seen them do a good job of going into Texas and winning battles for guys like Jordan Clay, and Louisiana for Trez Davis in the same vein, where Washington is really starting to understand what it takes and how to win nationally in some of these recruiting battles. But doing that along the defensive line and the transfer portal is a different beast, and one that I still believe this team needs to overcome. And they've done a really good job with the prospects that they have been able to pull in, but you still need to do more. That is not enough. What you have right now in the room, especially just considering all of the pieces you lost, to take the step forward that you're looking for in terms of overall in 2026. And I believe that guys like Kevin Wynn, guys like Enow Etta can absolutely help you reach that next level. And I think one more name that I'm really intrigued to talk about, who does have a little bit more production, is Sekou Kromah from Temple. This is a guy who at 6'3", 280 pounds, certainly just kind of fits the size profile that we saw them go after with what Darren Conley is being very similar. With 1 year of eligibility remaining, though, this is somebody who did have some injury issues this past year at Temple, but when he was on the field, he was the disruptor in the middle that you're looking for, and someone who can really get after the quarterback. 14 tackles, 4.5 for loss, 3 sacks. And one thing that I think is most important for looking at some of these mid-major talents and seeing if they're going to be ready to take that step up is how they performed in big games. And when Temple played their biggest opponents, this guy was at his best. The best game of his season, arguably the best game of his career, I'd say, came against Oklahoma earlier in the season. Not only did he get a sack, of John Mateer, he gets 7 tackles in that game. He gets 2.5 tackles for loss. He was extremely disruptive. He was all over the place. And again, this is one of those things where if you're going out there and you're scouting and you want to see if a guy like that, who some people might consider a little bit undersized to take a significant amount of reps in the Big Ten, can succeed at 6'3" and 280 pounds, I would look at numbers like that and games like that where he was able to put together consistent production and get after the quarterback and get to John Mateer again. In this case, all of those things are so important. And for what Washington is looking for, a deep rotation along the interior of the defensive line, this guy is absolutely somebody who can give you that. And I think that as we look at Washington potentially taking 2 or 3 more guys, which I think is very, very necessary, given how much turnover we've seen in this room, he is somebody who I would absolutely take a good long look at in terms of what Washington is looking for. And they also might want to take a look at some of these guys leaving Oregon, including Jayden Limar, who announced his commitment on Monday. And we'll get to that right after a message from our good friends over at Wayfair. The new year is here, and it's the perfect time to reset your routine and refresh your space. If you're spending more time at home, you might as well love how it looks and feels. That's why you should turn to Wayfair. It's a one-stop shop for getting your home back on track. From bedding and mattresses to storage solutions for every room, Wayfair makes it easy to start the year fresh. Wayfair has everything you need for a full home refresh all in one place. Whether you're updating your living room, organizing your space, or upgrading your work from home setup, Wayfair's huge selection makes it easy to find exactly what works for your style and budget. I picked up this new bookshelf back here, for example, and I absolutely love how it is just totally transformed this podcast studio. I think it looks awesome, and I'm able to store so much over there too. And I think it's a really great display to have in the background with all the cool stuff I've got over there. Get organized, refreshed, and back on track this new year for way less. Head to wayfair.com right now to shop all things home. That's WAYFAIR.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. So Washington lands another commit on Monday. I decided to hold off on talking about him for the Tuesday show because we spent a lot of time talking about Jayden Limar on this podcast over the past week, and for good reason. He is, like a lot of these other guys that I've been talking about, just such a great fit for what Washington really needs in the 2026 season, where you look at the numbers, it's not like he's taken a whole ton of carries. He's got 447 rushing yards and 5 touchdowns under his belt, average 4.7 yards per carry over 3 years at Oregon. However, you're looking for somebody with experience, somebody who can protect the quarterback, and somebody who can come in, pick up the offense really quickly, and just run the full route tree for you as a pass catcher too. And I think Jayden Limar does all of those things very, very well. And under Scotty Graham's tutelage for a year or so, it looks like there were just some minor things when it comes to just feel and just picking up blocks and following blocks that really kind of limited him at Oregon. And I feel like some of those things are things that Scotty Graham has done such a great job of teaching throughout his career. When you watch the growth of guys like Jonah Coleman and what Adam Muhammad was doing over his 2 years at Washington before departing for Cal, I think that Washington is sitting in a really good spot at the running back position. And it's why I've talked about Jayden Limar probably being the take for a while now, because it would have been great to go out and get somebody in the exact same light like a CJ Baxter. I'm really disappointed that Washington didn't necessarily explore that further, but it looks like, especially once Jayden Limar entered the transfer portal, that Washington was very comfortable with just finding a guy who can be a stopgap for you for 1 year. And with Jayden being in his final year of eligibility, that's exactly what he's going to do. You can give him a solid amount of touches where he's probably going to start a little bit for you, might start Jordan Washington depending on the opponent and different things like that. But you've got two guys right there, plus Damon Williams, who can all take a very similar number of carries. And if you're Jedd Fisch, you probably feel very comfortable with that, because this is just exactly what you need to just bridge the gap to the 2027 class. When you listen to Matt Doherty on this show talk about how this program feels about Brian Bonner, and especially with where he could be in, let's just say, a year from now in terms of size and adding weight, he could be your bell cow guy as early as 2027. That's not to say that you shouldn't stack talent at that position. It just feels like Washington is very confident in their evaluation at running back, and with two guys leading the way that both are, that have eligibility remaining for the 2027 season in Jordan Washington and Brian Bonner, it feels like this program is very confident on what those two guys can do as the leaders of your backfield. And again, I know I said this on the bonus show on Monday, as you everydayers know, but it is absolutely worth repeating that if you can go out and add a Noah Roberts, or let's just say Elijah Kimball, just to throw another name into the mix here in the 2027 class, if you're able to add one of those top guys that you're in on at that position in 2027, that's great, because all of a sudden you're still stacking the room. And if, let's say, Quade Carr or Julian McMahon or Ansu Sonoe do really break out and become one of these consistent contributors that you are looking for at that position, that's also great. Of course, you're going to be happy with that, right? But it's one of those things where you look at where this program is now, what it needs to succeed in 2026. You are going to be just fine with what Jayden Limar brings to the table, because I've seen so much excitement from the fan base around Jordan Washington, and rightfully so. And I think this coaching staff feels a very similar way about him. And instead of just throwing the whole, kitchen sink at him, which I'm sure some people would have been really happy with and really excited about, you don't need to ask him to do all the pass protection stuff now. You don't need to ask him to take 170 touches or anything like that, because that would just be so much for anybody, let alone a guy who had 27 touches as a redshirt freshman. You don't want to throw it all at him in that regard. And having Jayden Limar will help him learn everything a little bit better. He's somebody who's passionate about the program, obviously being from Lake Stevens and really wanting to commit to Washington out of high school. I think that all of those things are going to be really important with what is next for this program in 2026. And again, with a guy like Jayden in particular, there is just so much to like in terms of what this short-term fit is going to look like for the 2026 season. Now, like I said, I don't think that he's the only guy that Washington should be looking at from Oregon in terms of some of the transfer departures we've seen from them recently. And I'm sure there are going to be some of you everydayers who are yelling at me right now, hearing that saying, well, hold on, if Oregon didn't want him, why would Washington? And I feel that sometimes there are just bad fits. And with the way that Dan Lanning likes to recruit over guys and different things like that, some people just fall by the wayside. I'll talk about one of those guys in just a minute, because I think that he might make the least sense roster-wise where things are right now. I feel like you might already know who I'm talking about. But again, we'll get there in just a second, because the theme of this show has been defensive line. And I want to talk about Xadavian Sims, because this is a guy in the 2024 class who is, a 4-star recruit out of Oklahoma, and came in, wasn't necessarily a huge part of the rotation, but I think that at 6'3", 305 pounds, he's got the athleticism. He's got everything that you're looking for in that regard to come in and be a staunch run defender in the middle in the Big Ten, which is exactly what you're looking for. Somebody who can come in and give you some snaps in that regard. And if he is also able to give you something as a pass rusher, I think that is extremely important. But you're also just looking for guys to fill out this rotation and help you keep whoever you think your best pass rushers are going to be fresh for some of those big moments. And I think Xadavian Sims is somebody who absolutely, again, fits that mold perfectly well, because this is just what you're looking for. It goes back to the conversation that we were having a couple minutes ago, where you look at the guys that are in the room right now: Deshaun Watts, Darren Conley, Kai McClendon now, Logan George, who can certainly shift inside for you from time to time if need be. That's all great. That's all exactly what you're looking for. I feel like if Logan George does break out and become the impact pass rusher that you're looking for on the edge, that's awesome, but you're going to want to keep him out there. So you're going to want to have more on the interior. And how much do you want to throw at a guy like 4-star freshman T.I. Umukais? I feel like he's going to be able to handle a lot of things, but how much do you want to put on his shoulders right away? And with a guy like Xadavian Sims, no, he doesn't necessarily have a ton of experience, or just in terms of snaps at the Big Ten level, but he has still been practicing against Big Ten level offensive lines for 2 years now with Oregon. And if you add a guy like that, who already does, understand some things like the rivalry and different things like that, that would be a big benefit in terms of just what you're looking for from what you need up front. Some more edge, some more pass rush juice, everything in that light. And I think that's all very, very important. Another guy who Washington was very interested in terms of the 2025 class, who is leaving Oregon after one season, is former 4-star wide receiver Cooper Perry. This is another guy where, with a lot of these Oregon guys, I'm going to be watching Cal, I'm going to be watching Kentucky, where obviously their offensive and defensive coordinators, Will Stein and Tosh Lupoy, are now the head coaches. And I feel like Cooper Perry is certainly one of those guys who maybe he does follow Will Stein to Kentucky. Maybe he does follow Tosh Lupoy to Cal. We've already seen a couple other guys do that. Jericho Johnson, the defensive lineman, is getting crystal balls there. I was going to talk about him, but I don't think his relationship with the University of Washington as a whole, after stomping on the UW hat and sweater and whatever when he committed to Oregon, was going to go over very well. So I just want to throw his name out there. But I think that Cooper Perry is somebody who might not necessarily be a perfect fit in terms of listed at close to 6'1", 180 pounds, somewhere in that ballpark. He's not the typical X receiver that you're going to be looking for, but we just know how interested Washington was in that guy coming out of high school. So I think that there could be some interest there, but I don't think he's going to be their top target on the board. I'm still looking at somebody like Darrell Gill at wide receiver from Syracuse, because that, again, not only matches up with what you're looking for in terms of a short-term stopgap to fill a void there, but at the same point, it's somebody who does have experience, and that is more important. Where if it's somebody like, Quincy Porter, who obviously, as we talked about earlier, committed to Notre Dame, or a Mylan Graham, somebody with that elite athleticism level upside, who's a top 40, top 50 recruit, and you feel that you can tap into that full potential, great. I feel like that just helps a little bit more with what Washington needs in terms of wide receivers and helping Damon Williams out for the 2026 season, because there just are not a lot of experienced pass catchers on this roster. And there's a lot of upside, right? Like Desmond Roebuck, freshman All-American this past year. Decker DeGraff has certainly been able to contribute when needed. But outside of that, you just don't have a lot of guys. And as we've said a lot over the course of this transfer portal cycle, if somebody steps up, like Chris Lawson is someone who's able to take 60, 70 targets, Awesome. Of course you're happy with that, right? The same could be said about any of these guys. Jordan Clay, Justice Williams, Rasheed Williams, Trez Davis, Mason James, whoever that you think that person might be. That's all great. But if you want to take the step forward that you're looking for, it has been really shocking to see how this wide receiver recruiting class has fallen so far, or the transfer portal class, has fallen for Washington. And I've said it before, and I think it still holds true. There is a chance that whoever Washington really does want is not in the portal yet. And of course, there are back channels and all these sorts of things where they might be hearing, hey, this guy's entering the portal, or this guy is really considering entering the portal. Let's see how this one plays out. That is all very, very possible. It's not necessarily the best strategy, in my opinion, or one that can be considered extremely sustainable if that person doesn't enter the transfer portal. Then you're just kind of left with what else is out there. But I think that's something to keep in mind when discussing Cooper Perry, because again, not necessarily what you're perfectly looking for in that regard, but it's a name that's worth mentioning because we know how much interest this coaching staff had in a guy like that. And that leads us to one more guy who was committed to Washington at one point, tight end Vander Ploog, but we'll talk about him after a quick break, because we've got a message from our good friends over at Game Time. There's nothing like college football season, tailgates, packed stadiums, and being right there in the middle of it all. The energy, the bands, the moments you remember forever. But actually getting tickets, that part used to be frustrating with long queues, logins, and prices jumping at checkout. That's why Game Time gives the advantage back to fans. It's the easiest way to unlock amazing college football tickets and experiences in just a few taps. The app is incredibly easy to use. I went from browsing to buying tickets in just minutes. The zone deals really stand out. You pick the section, Game Time picks the seats, and you save even more. And knowing prices include all fees up front makes the whole process stress-free. Take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. So, as I was alluding to a minute ago, I was trying to have some fun and build up a little bit of drama, but oh well. The final guy is 4-star tight end Vander Ploog. And one of the biggest reasons I'd be interested in this is obviously because after 1 year, he does decide to leave Oregon, where they recruited ahead of him, not just through the transfer portal, but through the 2026 class as well. And Washington had provided him with a really solid home for quite a while. He flips just a couple days before signing day, something we talked about a lot here on this podcast and why that happened in terms of his relationship with Spencer Webb before he passed away and everything like that. So it was something where once that did come down, it wasn't necessarily the most shocking thing. But now that he has left, I'm curious to see if Washington is going to try to find a way to reunite with him, because I look at this room and there's a lot of really promising potential there. However, some of the guys at the back end, if something similar happens where Washington thinks that they do have an opportunity there and somebody else may not feel that they're going to be receiving playing time for one reason or another and they decide to transfer out, I just wouldn't be shocked if that does happen over the next, as I record this at 6 p.m. on January 12th. 72 hours if somebody does decide to enter the transfer portal, and that opens up a spot for Washington to go in and add a Vander Ploog to this roster, who gives them just such high upside, not just in terms of his frame at 6'6" and what he can bring as a pass catcher, but if he can fill that frame out and get to 240, 250, somewhere in that ballpark, what he can bring as a run blocker as well is exactly what this coaching staff is looking for. And I think what they kind of envisioned for him originally alongside Baron Naone when they were the two commits in the 2025 class. So I'm not saying that that's something that's going to happen, but I would certainly recommend keeping an eye on it, because crazier things have happened. We know that much for sure. And I think that if there was a path to reuniting these two sides and Vander Ploog ending up with Jedd Fisch and Jordan Paopao at Washington, I think that that is something that this coaching staff would really enjoy in terms of what he can bring, especially as a pass catcher moving forward. However, I want to switch gears here, and I want to talk about basketball for a few minutes, because Washington has an incredibly important string of games coming up. And the fact that they were able to, after some struggles in the state of Indiana, losing to the Hoosiers and then losing at number 5 Purdue, to bounce back the way that they did and get a win against a very tough Ohio State team at home, 81-74 on Sunday afternoon, was something I was very, very impressed by. And it started at the top right? Where Zoom Diallo was extremely impressive, 22 points, 3 assists, a couple of rebounds. He is someone who I continue to be impressed with him on a day in, day out basis, because he has very clearly taken so much time and so much pride into refining his game and transforming himself from somebody who, as a true freshman, thrived at putting his head down and getting to the rim and in the mid-range, to somebody who can be a threat at all 3 levels of the floor. In close, he still does have that strength and that ability when going downhill to absorb some contact and get to the rim, that mid-range pull-up jumper. And now that he's added a 3-pointer to his bag, he hit a couple on back-to-back possessions in the first half against Ohio State that really kept the game from getting out of hand and helped Washington climb back into it, as they trailed by as many as 9 in the first half. And I was so impressed with what he's brought to the table, and especially in a game where Washington was so short-handed in the backcourt because Jasir Rencher is still out with an injury. Desmond Claude was seemingly benched. All Danny Sprinkle said after the game was it was a team decision for him to miss the game. He was dressed. He did go shoot around, all those sorts of things. After missing practice on Saturday with what Danny Sprinkle said were personal reasons. So you can infer from that what you will. He was he did not want to elaborate any further on what was going on there. He also didn't play for the final 11 minutes against Purdue. So it certainly seems like a situation to monitor, especially if that continues against Michigan on Wednesday. But for the time being, that's all we know, and that's all we can share. With Wesley Yates also being out, it seems like he's nearing a return, though. I'll talk about him along with Jacob Ognacevic in a minute, because I think that with the way this backcourt is shaped up, with how Kimari Peterson, he not only hit a couple of clutch threes and really seemed to reinvigorate himself on that Indiana trip by shooting more than 40% combined through those 2 games from 3-point range, had 28 points back in his home state. All of those things are really important. And as Washington's backcourt continues to take shape and round out with all the injuries that this team has suffered throughout the course of the season, seeing a guy like that not only just take so much pride in what he's been able to do on the defensive end of the floor, but really just bust out of an incredibly frustrating shooting slump where he got a couple of bounces, where he hit one off the glass from the top of the key in this game against Ohio State in the second half. Seeing those things start to go his way is a really exciting sign, because with the amount of open shots Washington was missing in the early portion of the year, you had to imagine that some of those things were going to even themselves out. And I think we started to see that against Ohio State, because we started to see a lot of things against Ohio State where it wasn't just that. It was the hustle. It was the communication. It's the fact that they've been able to limit turnovers for the last almost month at this point. For the last 5 or 6 games, Washington has not really turned the ball over a lot. And there's something to be said for doing that now versus if you're able to do that with Michigan, Michigan State, and Nebraska all next up on your schedule. Like, that's going to be obviously a completely different discussion. But the fact that you were still able to do that is really, really important. And I think this team is taking strides. They are moving in the right direction, because I have it in my notes here that really the best way to describe how I feel that they looked on Sunday afternoon was like a well-oiled machine. And I don't think we'd seen that through the majority of the season, where Danny called Sunday's game the best that he has seen in terms of an execution standpoint in his time at Washington. And I think that really matters, again, with who is next up on the schedule, because when they're showing that kind of energy and that kind of intensity at both ends of the floor, which always radiates from Frank Kepnang, who was tremendous in this game. He came up clutch at several different points with a key chase down block, some offensive rebounds, some free throw shooting. All of those things, if he can continue to do that and provide the energy that he does, especially if this rotation is going to get a little bit deeper, if Wesley Yates comes back, if Jacob Ognacevic is able to come back in the next week or so, which it feels more and more like that's going to be the case, this team has everything it needs to make a run in Big Ten play. I mentioned Wesley Yates and Jacob Ognacevic. Danny Sprinkle did mention them during his post-game press conference, and the biggest thing that he said about them was he spoke to them. They were both listed as questionable on the Big Ten injury report, and that he spoke to both of them before the game, and that they just didn't feel comfortable coming back yet. And he said sometimes it's a mental hurdle, sometimes it's physical. There are a bunch of different things that will prevent guys, and he said he didn't want to push it where Wesley is still just a couple weeks removed from having surgery on a broken bone in his wrist. And it's really encouraging that he has been able to progress this quickly, because when we talked to Danny about that when it happened, he said it could be 3 weeks, it could be 6 months. We honestly have no idea, because he said it was a very rare bone that was broken in his wrist. So that's one of the reasons. And it also is in his shooting wrist, which is something to keep in mind there. And then with Jacob, obviously we haven't seen him all season as he continues to recover from a preseason foot injury. But if you get both those guys back, say as early as Wednesday, what they can do for this rotation is so exciting, and it makes it so much deeper. And if you add guys like that, and what especially Jacob brings, because we've seen Wesley already and him be an incredibly dynamic scorer who can give you points near the bucket, who can give you 3-pointers where he shot at almost 44% clip last year, all of those things as well. That is exactly what this team needs, because the more talent you can have in that regard, the better. And I think that this team is really starting to get hot at the right time. And I've done this on purpose. The fact that I haven't said the name Hannes Steinbach just yet is really important, because you know what you're getting from him every night, right? 21 points and 9 rebounds in this most recent game. He is going to be such a sturdy factor in the middle, where he got almost shut out, where he only had 4 rebounds against Purdue. He was still able to put 17 points on the board. He's such a consistent factor offensively. And if you add a guy like Jacob to the mix, who averaged 20 points and 8 rebounds per game at Lipscomb last season, combined with Frank Kepnon, combined with Nicole Zapina, as he continues to just get more ingrained in the system, Lathan Somerville, whenever he comes back, all of a sudden, with all the attention that Hannes was drawing when they went and played Purdue, you're not going to be able to do that anymore if Washington is able to play some of these bigger, longer lineups with Bryson Tucker contributing more on the glass too. Washington does have all the talent and all the pieces necessary to find success in this conference. It's just been a matter of putting it together. And I think that Sunday's game against Ohio State showed that all of those pieces can come together. And if they continue to do so in that way, I think this team can absolutely go on a run. We'll see what these next 3 games look like, because even if, let's say, they go 1-2 and they are able to pull off an upset over one of these teams, if they just look consistently solid and are able to show growth and show that they are heading in the right direction, I'm not going to be concerned if they go 1-2 and their record in Big Ten play would be 3-5 at that point in time. With what this team has talent-wise, I think that they can absolutely beat anybody on any given day. It's just a matter of finding ways to put it together, because the offensive sets are starting to look more fluid. Guys are moving. The screening without the ball, all of these other sorts of things have really fallen into place. And as this roster continues to grow with so much time remaining in Big Ten play, I think this team has a lot to be excited about, but we'll see what's next. That's all I got for you today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. If you like what we have to offer here on Locked On Huskies, please make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So please make sure to click that like button, click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please give us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll talk to you on Wednesday.